Dexter wants you to accept this as a simple fact. A serial killer worked inside a police department for years, and the FBI never caught him. That's the premise the show runs on. It sounds like a flex. It sounds like genius. But when you actually line the scenes up, the question shifts. Not because Dexter is sloppy, because the opportunities to catch him are sitting in plain sight, and the people with badges keep stepping around them like they're inconvenient. The real mystery isn't how Dexter dodged the FBI. It's why the FBI kept treating him like he couldn't possibly be real. Because what if the reason the FBI never caught Dexter Morgan isn't Dexter's brilliance? What if the reason is that everyone involved needed a version of the world where a Dexter Morgan couldn't exist? The usual explanation makes sense. Dexter knows evidence because he lives in evidence. He's a blood spatter analyst. He hears every theory and every lead. He can anticipate searches, redirect suspicion, and clean up his own mistakes before anyone notices. That take works until Season 1 quietly shows the unfair advantage. Dexter doesn't just understand the system, he gets to touch it. Season 1 has Dexter walking into active scenes, scanning the room, and offering a single observation that becomes the new direction of the case. He's not asked to justify it like an outsider would. He's treated like a tool the department owns. Season 1 also gives you the first uncomfortable truth. The person who reacts most realistically to Dexter's vibe is treated like the problem. Doakes doesn't dislike Dexter in a sitcom way. He's alarmed. He's the only one who doesn't buy the harmless lab nerd routine. And Season 1 plants the biggest red flag of all with the ice truck killer. Dexter is pulled into something personal, something intimate, and nobody thinks to ask why the department's quiet blood guy keeps ending up near the emotional center of the most theatrical case Miami has seen in years. That's why Dexter is just too smart isn't enough. The show is showing something else. Dexter survives because he's protected by the way cops, and later the FBI, prefer to see their own world. The first time this should fall apart is Season 2. Bodies rise out of the ocean. The Bay Harbor butcher becomes national news. The entire department goes under a microscope. Then the feds arrive, and Frank Lundy walks into Miami Metro like he owns the building. This is the moment that should end Dexter's story if the title premise is literally true. Because Lundy isn't Doakes. He's not ruled by instinct and anger. He's patient. He's behavioral. He's the kind of investigator who doesn't need a smoking gun if he can map your life. And Dexter is standing 10 feet away from him. So when Season 2 ends with the case closed and Dexter still free, the question stops being about Dexter's technical skill. It becomes about how a system can stare directly at a monster and still decide the monster has to be someone else. The key scenes that matter aren't complicated, and that's what makes them scary. Dexter moves through Miami Metro like it's his house. He's in the evidence flow, not adjacent to it. He watches the Bay Harbor butcher profile being built from inside the same building where the killer sits at a desk. Doakes escalates from suspicion to obsession and gets socially isolated for it. He becomes the irritant, not the warning. Lundy builds a clean profile, and the department takes comfort in the idea that the killer will look like a killer. Then later seasons keep echoing the same design with new characters. Quinn notices too much, then backs off. LaGuerta gets too close, and the entire institution treats her like she's losing it. Deb gets too close, and the truth doesn't just threaten Dexter, it threatens her ability to keep living. That's the context. Now the deeper case. The FBI didn't fail because Dexter was invisible. They failed because Dexter fit too neatly into the story law enforcement tells itself about where danger comes from. The first force protecting Dexter is the least glamorous. He controls the environment where evidence becomes truth. In Season 1, this is disguised as competence. Dexter reads blood, gives answers, and everyone feels safer. But those answers don't just solve cases. They shape the official reality of the case. By Season 2, the advantage becomes absurd. The FBI is in the building chasing the Bay Harbor butcher, and Dexter still has access to the same rooms where the investigation lives. He hears what they know in real time. He can adjust his behavior based on the current theory of the smartest people in the room. And the detail people miss is that this isn't only access to information, it's access to the chain of custody. Dexter lives at the exact point where a smear becomes a report, where chaos becomes a conclusion, where a suspicion becomes paperwork. That's why the blood slides matter beyond being trophies. They're not just souvenirs of victims. They're souvenirs of control. Each slide is proof that Dexter can create death and still show up the next morning to help decide what that death officially means. Season 2 shows the ugliest version of this with Doakes. Dexter doesn't need to outwit the FBI with a brilliant plan. He needs the system to do what it already does when it finds a convenient suspect. Once the story around Doakes starts to solidify, the machine commits. The machine protects itself from uncertainty. The machine prefers closure over doubt. And this isn't a one-season trick. Later, Quinn starts sniffing around Dexter after Rita's death and the Kyle Butler mess. The suspicion is there. The pattern is there. Dexter keeps being adjacent to disasters and never becomes the disaster. But Quinn is also dirty. He has his own compromises. Dexter doesn't have to destroy him with genius. He only has to let Quinn feel how alone he'll be if he pushes this. Then Season 7 brings the pattern back to the Bay Harbor Butcher case itself. LaGuerta starts rebuilding what everyone agreed to bury. She's not guessing, she's assembling. And Dexter's response is the same as always: stay close to the evidence and manage the story before the story manages you. The second force protecting Dexter is social design. Dexter survives because he is engineered to be the last person anyone wants to suspect. Season 1 is full of quiet performance. Dexter's humor is small, his awkwardness is mild. He's helpful without being threatening. He doesn't compete, he doesn't posture. He makes himself useful, and usefulness buys forgiveness. Miami Metro treats Dexter less like a man and more like equipment. The blood guy, the specialist, the calm one. When he speaks up, nobody flinches. They nod. They let his words sit on the table like facts. So when an FBI task force arrives in Season 2, they are entering a neutral building. They're stepping into a culture that already has a shared understanding of who Dexter is. That shared understanding is armor. Lundy is important here because he's competent and still human. He can profile the Bay Harbor Butcher as methodical, controlled, and close to law enforcement. That profile points in a cold direction, but the emotional brain does a different math. People look for monsters where monsters usually live in stories. Outsiders, loner types, someone who feels wrong. Dexter doesn't feel wrong to them. Dexter feels like a coworker. There's a small, brutal moment in Season 2 when Lundy is in the building, and Dexter can still float through conversations without being watched like a suspect. He's not treated as a person who needs to be vetted. He's treated as part of the scenery. Rita is part of the shield, and the show uses her like an alibi that breathes. A man with a girlfriend, with kids in the house, with domestic problems and small responsibilities, reads as ordinary. Ordinary doesn't just lower suspicion. Ordinary makes the idea of hidden evil feel embarrassing to even consider. Nobody wants to be the person who says it out loud without proof. Season 4 deepens that cover by turning Dexter into a husband and father. Suddenly his lateness looks like stress, not secrecy. His exhaustion looks like normal life, not the aftermath of murder. And the more he resembles the most common version of a man in crisis, the less anyone wants to interpret his cracks as something monstrous. Even in New Blood, the same mechanism shows up in different clothes. Different town, different name, same idea. People can accept weirdness in a local guy. They don't want to accept that a legend could be sitting across from them at a diner. The third force is the most damning. Every time someone gets close, the system turns on that person before it turns on Dexter. Doakes is the first and clearest example. His suspicion isn't rewarded, it's punished socially. He's framed as unstable. Aggressive, personal, like he's just being a bully. The department doesn't move toward his warning. It moves away from it. Then the Bay Harbor Butcher case needs a body to hold the story together. Doakes becomes the perfect sacrifice because he's already isolated and already resented. The system doesn't need to be tricked into choosing him. It needs a suspect it can live with. Lundy, for all his skill, still has to operate inside cooperation and politics. He can't investigate like a ghost. He needs buy-in. He needs people to answer questions, share files, and not freeze him out. So he goes where the evidence in the room allow him to go. He looks for the killer in the expected places. He doesn't jump to the conclusion that the answer is sitting in the lab, smiling politely, because that conclusion would require the entire building to admit it failed at the most basic task, noticing what's in front of it. This pattern doesn't stop. It becomes a rule. Quinn gets close, then the pressure shifts. He's reminded, without anyone saying it outright, that suspicion has a cost. Dexter doesn't have to win the argument. He only has to let Quinn realize how much easier it is to drop it. LaGuerta gets closest, and the response is even more revealing. She's not just challenging Dexter. She's challenging the department's past. If she's right, then the Bay Harbor Butcher case wasn't a solved case. It was a comforting mistake, so the institution treats her pursuit like a flaw. Political, emotional, obsessive. It becomes socially cleaner to believe she's spiraling than to believe the blood spatter analyst has been the serial killer the whole time. There's a moment in Season 7 where you can almost feel the room resisting the truth. LaGuerta is standing in a world full of people who should care about evidence, and she's alone. Because if she's right, everyone has to face what they benefited from: closure, reputation, the clean story. So they don't just doubt her, they resist her. And Dexter helps that resistance along because he understands something the FBI often forgets when it enters a local department. Investigations don't just run on facts. They run on relationships, they run on fear, they run on pride. This is why the big Season 2 scenes hit so hard when you watch them with your eyes open. When Lundy is building the Bay Harbor Butcher profile, Dexter isn't acting like a hunted man. He's listening like a colleague, calm, curious, adjusting. He isn't running from the FBI. He's monitoring their belief system. When the investigation starts leaning toward Doakes, it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like gravity. A system under pressure wants a solution it can explain, and Doakes is explainable. Then the case closes, and the building exhales. Not because they caught the right man, because they gotta stop being afraid. That's the part the title premise hides. The FBI never caught Dexter because catching Dexter would mean admitting the worst possible thing: the monster wasn't outside the system. He was inside it, wearing an ID badge, contributing to clearance rates, and making everyone's job easier. The writers frame it this way for a simple reason: Dexter can't be taken down by pure realism too early, or the engine stops. So the show builds a world where the danger isn't only Dexter's skill. It's the human refusal to accept a contradiction that big. It also keeps Dexter watchable by making his escapes feel like a mix of competence and inevitability. The story shifts the spotlight away at the last second, again and again, and calls it suspense. It works because it's grounded in something true. People don't want to believe the nightmare is already in the room. So why did the FBI never catch Dexter Morgan? Because Dexter wasn't operating like a fugitive. He was operating like an insider with access to the narrative itself. Because the FBI arrived expecting a monster who lived outside the system, and Dexter proved the monster could be the system's most useful little cog. Because every time someone started seeing him clearly, the institution found a way to label that person the problem before it ever labeled Dexter the threat. Dexter didn't just hide bodies, he hid behind procedure. He hid behind familiarity. He hid behind the comfort people take in a solved case. And the most unsettling part is how effortless it looks. Not that he got away with it, that everyone helped him do it.